Welcome to This Explainer. We often think of major industrial disasters as things that happen far, far away or in some bygone era. But today, we're unpacking a pivotal 1985 accident that served as a massive, unavoidable wake-up call right here in the United States. The Union Carbide chemical leak in West Virginia brought the terrifying threat of an absolute catastrophe literally into the backyards of everyday Americans.
Okay, so let's dive into this by asking the really chilling question that hung heavy over the entire country at the time. Could a Bhopal-level disaster happen in America? Just months prior, the world had been completely devastated by the Bhopal gas tragedy in India, a catastrophe involving a Union Carbide plant. People were understandably anxious, and honestly, they had every reason to wonder if the plants in their own neighborhoods were actually safe.
The timeline here is honestly pretty eerie. On one hand, you have December 1984 in Bhopal, India. Then, less than a year later, August 1985 in Institute, West Virginia. It's the exact same company, Union Carbide, and another serious chemical accident. This fast-paced timeline is absolutely crucial because it showed how quickly the nightmare scenario seemed to be repeating itself on American soil, and it raised intense alarms nationwide.
Section 1. The Shadow of Bhopal, an everyday town with towering tanks. Let's set the scene a bit. Picture Institute, West Virginia. Over the years, the massive infrastructure of the local chemical plant had just kind of become part of the scenery. The residents were totally accustomed to seeing these towering tanks punctuating their skyline every single day. Few imagine that a dangerous leak could happen so close to their homes. I mean, when you live next to something for so long, it essentially becomes invisible until the systems fail, and that background suddenly becomes a very urgent threat.
Section 2. The aldicarb oxime leak. A minute-by-minute breakdown.
Early on the morning of August 11th, 1985, this sleeping town was about to wake up to a genuine nightmare. The invisible threat was something called aldicarb oxime, which is a highly toxic industrial chemical. It was being held in a storage tank at the Institute facility when, without warning, the containment failed. The tank just began releasing this silent, dangerous substance directly into the environment. The tick-tock pacing of this crisis was just terrifying. In the early morning, the initial leak begins. Mere minutes later, a poisonous cloud actually forms and starts drifting outward, moving silently right into nearby neighborhoods. It took hours for Hazmat teams to carefully prevent the chemical from spreading any further. It was just this incredibly rapid escalation from a mechanical failure to a full-blown community-wide emergency. Inside the plant? Well, the reality of the leak was immediate. As the emergency alarms blared, employees who rushed to contain the breach were hit with intense, sensory overloading symptoms. We're talking burning eyes, severe coughing, real difficulty breathing, and skin irritation. This wasn't just a flashing warning light on a computer screen somewhere. It was a highly toxic exposure taking out the very people who were actively trying to stop it. Section 3. Containing the crisis. The heroes and the lockdown. So, how exactly do you stop an invisible, drifting cloud of toxic gas? The local authorities had to pull off a massive, coordinated effort to basically throw a protective blanket over the whole town. First, they quickly warned the nearby communities. Second, schools and businesses took immediate emergency precautions and went into lockdown. Third, residents were strictly advised to just shelter in place indoors. And finally, hazardous materials teams, geared up in full protective suits, entered the toxic zone to manually stop the leak. While those hazmat teams did manage to bring the leak under control relatively quickly, we can't ignore the human toll it took. More than 100 people required medical evaluation, and this included a lot of the plant workers who had to be actively treated for their chemical exposure. Think about that, over 100 lives directly disrupted by an industrial failure on a Sunday morning.
Section 4. Legacy of chemical safety. The national ripple effect.
Once the poisonous cloud finally dissipated, the dust definitely did not settle. This incident aggressively reignited public concern across the entire United States. Investigators descended on the plant and honed in on 3 critical areas to figure out how the system broke down: plant safety procedures, emergency planning protocols, and equipment maintenance. They absolutely had to know how a tank could just start leaking into an American town. The resulting investigation starkly highlighted some massive operational gaps. It proved, without a doubt, the vital importance of rigorous training for workers and the absolute need for rapid emergency response capabilities. But maybe most importantly, It showed that keeping the public in the dark about what was actually inside those towering tanks was simply no longer an option. In the years that followed, sweeping changes totally transformed the industry. The U.S. strengthened chemical safety regulations, drastically improved emergency notification systems, and required comprehensive disaster response plans. And this actually matters to you today because these specific historical reforms are exactly why your own community now has emergency phone alerts and rigorous safety protocols in place. It was a real game changer.
Thankfully, the West Virginia chemical leak didn't become as deadly as the tragedy in Bhopal, but it served as a powerful, unavoidable warning. Even smaller industrial accidents can place thousands of lives at risk. It proved that a localized failure can literally send a poisonous cloud over neighborhoods in a matter of minutes.
Today, this incident serves as a living memory. It reminds us that protecting our cities requires constant vigilance, proper equipment maintenance, and incredibly strict safety standards. You can't just build a tank, fill it with something toxic, and forget about it, right? It requires daily, rigorous attention to make sure the surrounding community stays safe. Ultimately, the lesson from both Bhopal and West Virginia is perfectly summed up right here. Preventing a disaster is always better than responding to one. It really doesn't matter how brave the hazmat teams are or how fast the lockdown is initiated. The ultimate goal is to ensure that the alarm never has to ring in the first place. So I want to leave you with this final thought to explore the next time you look at the industrial structures in your own town. Are the facilities near you actually living up to the standards forged by this 1985 wake-up call? Is your community truly prepared for the invisible threats that might be sitting right in its own backyard? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep asking the important questions.